Hello there, everyone. Well, here we go. And I have a number of things to talk about. And the first thing to talk about is something that comes from Joe M, who asks, will social media collapse? Is it just a fad? Or is it here to stay? Now, obviously, we all know Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, obviously. And these are all social networks. And they all have their great points and their bad points. And a lot of people have recently left Facebook because of security issues, and they know that Big Brother is watching them. But guess what? Big Brother is watching you wherever you are on the web now. Thanks to Snowden, we now know that targeted individuals can expect to have their home PCs penetrated completely, and it's just rubbish, really. So that's not really a reason to give up on social networks. Now, social networks have some very useful features. I use Facebook a lot, keeps me in touch with a lot of friends and family who live all over the place. Also has made me some new online friends. And I rate Facebook pretty highly. There's still a fair amount of spam on there, especially on the Messenger service, but they seem to have clamped down on most of the bogus users. However, as I tested recently on behalf of someone else, it is quite easy to create a bogus user on Facebook if you use an email service like Hushmail and you anonymize yourself using the Tor browser. It's still possible to create valid profiles even if you've already got one. So not all the holes have been plugged yet. Twitter, on the other hand, has some problems. Twitter, there is a large amount of what I'd like to call bogosity on Twitter. I mean, let's take, for example, the fact that I've got 20,000 followers plus on Twitter, and I don't know where they all came from. I don't even know if they're all real, but it's very rare that I see messages from any of them. So there's something strange going on there. And my YouTube channel doesn't seem to get a lot of traffic from Twitter, despite the fact that every video I post goes out as a tweet. So Twitter is losing its usefulness. The only thing it's really useful for is search engine optimization, because Google does, I believe, look at the chat content, hashtags, URLs posted, and so on and so forth, and takes a special note of retweets. So if you want your web type to be the top in Google, put a URL in your tweet and get everyone you know to retweet it like mad. And this is one of the problems with social media. It's manipulation for commercial gain. And sure, it's going to go on whatever you have. Google Plus has got some similar issues, I have to say, to Twitter. A lot of what I receive on Google Plus is spam. I just ignore it most of the time. Now, YouTube itself has cleaned up its act and is now very good, very usable, very useful. And there are some issues if you're a content provider like me around monetization, when very often you find a video that's very popular suddenly isn't monetized anymore. Quite strange, that one. And a friend of mine who's been going along for an awful long time has actually had a lot of his content demonetized, and he's gone from having several $100s a month to almost nothing. And there's no appeal mechanism. There's no way you can find out what's going on. and that is really, really quite crap. So that is really the state of play at the moment. LinkedIn, obviously, I didn't mention. I am on LinkedIn. Keeps me in contact with a lot of old work colleagues, basically. And that's the only use I've got for it. Although I do believe people have found jobs through LinkedIn. So what is the future of social networking? Well, basically, I think that the future is in niches, because obviously some social network sites are going to collapse if they don't control the spam, if there's too many bogus users, too many useless messages, and so on and so forth. Intrusive advertising. Facebook used to be a major headache from that point. It's not so bad now. You can actually turn adverts off if you want. If you don't want to see Coca-Cola ads every time you log in, you can actually opt not to see ads from that person. So new social media networks are obviously going to emerge, and they're going to offer niche features like maybe security. I mean, there is a secure social network already, and that is on the darknet, so you can only access it through Tor browser, and it's called Darknet Social, and all the drug dealers and pimps obviously hang out on there. But really, why can't security be provided for the rest of us, and without a load of bullshit, really? So that is a niche that someone needs to exploit. But I don't believe that social media and social networks is just a fad. In fact, I think as long as there is an internet, they will exist in one form or another. Maybe in a form we've not even thought of yet. Maybe in a form where you can have a 3D avatar of yourself that copies your face movements, your facial expressions, so that those people who are really shy and don't want to post videos of themselves on the net can actually do so, because what people are seeing is just a cartoon representation, or maybe even a quite realistic representation of them, but it's not actually them. So I think that's covered everything that I'd like to say on that particular subject there. And the next subject I've been asked to talk about is the Russian jet shoot down recently, and Giza Bonanza has asked me to talk about that for a while, so I will. Let me just refer to my notes for a minute. I find it almost impossible to do a completely off-the-cuff presentation. I'm not Greg Hunter. But anyway, the Russian jet shoot down. The first thing I'm going to say is that, do I think it was a deliberate shoot down by Turkey? Yes, I do. I think it was totally premeditated, and there's one big giveaway, and that is the fact that a lot of media were at the place where it happened at the right time, including two major Turkish television networks who had their cameras all set up. So if that's not a good indication that they knew that it was going to go down, I don't really know what is. And what I think is that in the attempt to stave off the blame and responsibility for world financial collapse, the elite have come up with two main plans, two main alternatives. And the first alternative is war. They want to start World War III or World War IV, as some people would have it, because a lot of people say that World War III was in fact the Cold War. But yeah, I don't really go along with that. I'm going to carry on calling it World War III. And the second alternative is global warming, which I'll talk about later. And either of these two things are going to force a major economic reset, with of course no blame being attached to the politicians, no blame being attached to the bankers, which is kind of convenient for them, isn't it? And World War III seems to be starting, or started, by a provocation of Russia by NATO, because don't forget that Turkey is a NATO country, and other countries such as America and the UK and France and Germany are all sworn to jump in should anyone attack Turkey. So if the Russians decide they wish to attack Turkey in retaliation, they've got the whole of NATO to deal with. However, things have changed. And why is that? Because China have thrown their hat into the ring, or rather their aircraft into the ring, and they've sent planes to Syria to fly with Russia against ISIS. So that could change the equation a bit, because as far as I'm aware, Russia might be kind of defeatable or might not, who knows? But certainly I don't think anyone would want to go against the combined might of Russia and China. That would be a totally different situation. And what's really irritating me about this whole thing is the US spin that they're not ISIS, that the Russians are fighting, and they're hoping to persuade the Russians to join them in the fight against ISIS, when Russia has really been fighting against them all along. I mean, the US arming so-called moderate rebels, those moderate rebels turned into Al-Qaeda, and then Al-Qaeda spawned some more moderate rebels in Syria, and the US has been arming them again. Talk about, well, it's not once bitten, twice shy, it's twice bitten, never shy, it seems to be. And so these moderates have turned into ISIS stroke ISIL stroke Islamic State, or whatever you care to call them. And it's a big mess. So you now have the US and ISIS facing off against Russia. Who would have predicted that? In my World War III video done earlier, I did predict, I think it was about a year ago now, that ISIS would actually be one of the major protagonists in World War III, and that looks like it might play out if they don't allow the Russians to crush them. And Obama seems determined not to let the Russians crush them, because they're his best plan for starting World War III. Yippee! So I'm really against all religious fundamentalists. I mean, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, atheist. I mean, I know it seems unlikely, but there are violent Buddhist fundamentalists. Work that one out. Here you have a religion that is famous for its attitude that nothing should be harmed, and you have violent Buddhist fundamentalists. There is something rather nutty about that, as there is with most fundamentalist doctrines. Now, I have to say that Russia is fighting Islamic State. They're not fighting some mysterious bunch of Syrian moderate rebels. It's Islamic State they're fighting, the people that have taken over a lot of Iraq and now quite a lot of Syria. And the US has been supporting Islamic State. Whether it will continue to do so now that China's actually entered the fray and France has started conducting bombing raids, I have no idea. But it's well worth a watch. That's what I say. So that's that one. I think that's all I want to say on there at the moment, except to say watch my earlier World War III video you'll find that that is quite interesting. And number 3, it's the old chestnut, global warming, which I've also covered before. Is global warming real? Asks, I haven't written his name down. I think it was Silver something. But anyway, is global warming real? Well, is climate change real? The answer is very definitely a resounding yes. The climate's changing all the time. It goes up, it goes down. Temperatures go all over the place. If you look at historical records, and we now have historical records that go back something like 30,000 years. And this is thanks to scientific efforts around ice core analysis and lake bottom silt analysis, because by looking at the types of creatures and the distribution of types that have died and dropped into the silt, they can actually determine quite accurately the temperature of the environment at the time. So we've got a reasonably complete record, not on a year by year basis, obviously, but a reasonably complete record. Enough to show us that there's around about a 2,500 to 3,000 year dramatic variation in the Earth's climate. It swings from reasonably warm, which is where we are now, to ice age and back again. And I don't see that there's any way that we can actually stop this. I don't think even geoengineering will do it, because the main cause is most likely outside our control. The sun, for example. So, yes, climate change is real, but man-made climate change is definitely not. And at the moment, we're on the verge of a cooling cycle. We're just dropping into a cooling cycle. We've had a period of 18 years of flat temperature. Yes, that's right. There's been no global warming since early 1991. None. Zero. And here we have this weekend all the world's leaders gathered in Paris to debate, what are we going to do about global warming? Nothing. There isn't any. That's my answer to them. It would save a lot of money if they just all went home. It would also save a lot of carbon emissions. I've seen quotes that 300,000 tons of carbon has been emitted due to this conference because of everyone jetting in and all the preparations for it. So it seems kind of hypocritical. Obama's trip alone, they reckon, has used so much carbon that you're talking about 75 cars running for a year will produce that much carbon. Now, the thing that really opened my eyes to this being absolutely wrong, well, there were two things really. The first one that really made me look at it was Emailgate, where the English researchers were caught passing emails around saying, basically, how can we figure these numbers so that it looks like there's some global warming? Now, the motives for this are obvious. They need money for research grants, and indeed in recent years it has been said by more than one scientist that the best way to get funding for your project is to make sure you have positive results on global warming in there somewhere, or positive global warming research. So hence the deluge of papers that are all pro global warming in the science community. They need the money. Now, the second thing was that the originator of global warming, who was a gentleman called Professor Roger Revelle, and he first proposed that we were going to have a problem with global warming many years ago. He actually died in 1991, but before he died, he sent a lot of letters to Congress saying, look, we jumped the gun, it's probably not real. And immediately Al Gore called him senile, Well, all those who knew him said that in 91, just before he died, he was absolutely as bright as a button and an extremely intelligent man. Definitely probably more intelligent than Al Gore. So, no warming for an awful long time. And historically, there's a lot of reasons for the cycles that we see. And then I went from there to look at how the simulations work, because all of these global warming predictions are based on computer simulations. And to my shock, I found out there are three major things that they don't take into account at all. One is the variability of the output from our main energy source here, the sun. Every bit of heat, well, nearly every bit of heat that lands on the Earth comes directly from the sun. Some of it comes indirectly from the moon, but it's still reflected solar radiation. So, how variable is our sun? And the best estimates that I've seen is historically the solar energy might vary by as much as 10% up or 10% down from its average value. That's a big swing. It's no wonder we get ice ages. 10% less solar energy, whack, ice age. Really nice amount of sun, we get moderate times like we've got at the moment. So, yeah. The second thing they don't take into account is water vapor. Now, water vapor is a very intense greenhouse gas. That's one of the effects that it has. It reflects heat back down. This is why when you have a rainy evening, the night is almost guaranteed to be warm, even in the winter, because the heat from the land is trapped. And they don't take this into account. The other thing, of course, that water vapor does when it's in the form of clouds is reflect sunlight, and that causes cooling. And without any evidence at all, the scientists have kind of assumed that the two things cancel each other out, when in fact they don't, because there's water vapor all the way through the Earth, all the way through the air, and clouds are pretty sporadic. Plenty of places on the Earth that don't really get any cloud cover at all. So that's water vapor. The next thing is methane release. Now, I'm not talking about McDonald's flatulent cows in South America, although that has been posed as a concern, and they're spending some money on a research project to try and reduce the cow's flatulence. As Max Kaiser said in one of his videos the other day, well, it's an awful lot of corks. But most of the methane that is released into the atmosphere is released from the seabed. Some of you may not know this, but underneath the oceans, in the really deep parts where it's very, very cold, methane turns into solid methane ice. They actually call it methane clathrate for some reason. I don't know why. And things can happen that disturb this. One of them is undersea volcanoes. You get a new warm spot on the seabed. Obviously, the methane's going to warm up. It's going to bubble to the surface. And recently, several ship sinkings have been based on this. Basically, the ocean turns into massive bubbles underneath the ship. The water density is therefore reduced dramatically. Ship sinks for no apparent reason, and it sinks really, really quickly. Now, obviously, there's an awful lot of methane released like this, far more than McDonald's farting cows, and it's not taken into account. And the fourth scandal about these climate models is that way back when they first started producing these computer-based models in the late 70s, early 80s, they kind of couldn't get them to work at all, which is hardly surprising because of the number of things that they can't calculate and have to leave out. And the only way they could get them to work out is by multiplying the carbon dioxide effects by 3. And then suddenly, on that particular set of curves that they had for temperatures, the climate models suddenly worked out. So in all current climate models, the effects of carbon dioxide are boosted by 3, and it makes it look like carbon dioxide is a huge culprit. Now, in actual fact, if you look at the major global warming cycles of the world, they nearly all occurred at a time when mankind was producing practically zero CO2. So there is no smoking gun to point at carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not a culprit. Seem to have an airplane going over rather low on this nice cold wintry evening. So that's what I've got to say, and if you want a really good treatment of this subject, then there is a video on YouTube by the founder of the Weather Channel, who was a global warming enthusiast to start with and has come out violently against it. And his name is John Coleman. If you search for John Coleman Climate, you'll probably find it. And I would refer you to that video, plus also my previous video. I've repeated myself a bit from there. I'm sorry. And we come to the final thing that I want to talk about tonight. And the final thing, I just refer here to my short form notes. The final thing is really two. It's split into two, but one follows on from the other. I've been asked by Lucretia UK to do something on UK economic collapse prepping. Well, that's another thing. I have actually done a video about Lucretia, but I'm willing to repeat some of it and add some new observations. And Aaron GB asked me about what about the housing bubble in the UK, misnamed as it is, because there is no UK housing bubble, and I'll cover that in a moment. Right, so the first thing is prepping for economic collapse in the UK. I'm no longer, I have to say, I'm no longer quite as sure as I was that even a world economic collapse will affect the UK as badly as was thought. Now, why do I say this? I say this because of the volume of inbound investment we have and the amount of property owned by billionaires over here. If someone's a billionaire, they own property in the UK. It's as simple as that. If someone's in business, they own a slice of a UK, probably financial company. And that brings me on to the second part of the reason. All the major banks seem to have their headquarters here. And the City of London financial operation is absolutely enormous. And these bankers all have family. And so whatever they do to the rest of the world, I have a funny feeling that the UK may well escape, not unscathed, but with less damage than it would do otherwise. So perhaps having all those bankers over here was a really shrewd move. But should the brand stuff hit the fan, there are really 4 major worries. The primary worry is food. Now, whichever country you're in, you're going to be quite surprised when you dig into it and find out just how many days food reserve your country actually has. In the UK, we have 2 days. if there are no imports, as there would not be in a true global economic collapse, no one could afford to send anything anywhere, no one would be able to send anything anywhere, then you're looking at a real food shortage after 2 days. And this is why recently the guy who was the advisor to the UK government during the last big financial crisis got onto Twitter and advised everyone to actually stock up on at least 2 weeks worth of food and water. And I can remember the last economic collapse when people were mildly worried. Supermarket shelves emptied overnight because basically there was an announcement that we were 48 hours away from a collapse. That was a lie. We weren't 48 hours away from a collapse. We were 24 hours away, according to a friend of mine who's a merchant banker. But never mind. So food is the major issue. And if you're going to keep food that's canned, that's fine. Dehydrated food, however, I wouldn't keep too much of it, because the other thing we're going to be short of is water. The reason we're going to be short of water is there won't be any power. Now, the plan was on the second day of this collapse, the plan was to turn off the power and only allow everyone to have power for 1 hour every day. That would have lasted a week, and then it would be no power at all. But letting the power come on for an hour a day ensures rationing, and that was the basic idea. And the problem with no power is no power instantaneously means no water coming out of your tap. There's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that the water has to be pumped. All the pumps are electrical. The second reason is that there are fail-safe valves on water mains that if you lose electrical power, they close automatically. Same goes with gas, actually. So, what are your plans when on day 2 there's no water? Have you filled your bath up? How long is that stagnant water in your bath going to last you to drink? How about drinking the water out of the toilet? Yeah, you need to put in some bottled water, and I myself have also got a hand-pumped water filter that I can literally take muddy water straight out of a canal or a puddle, run it through the filter, and it's safe to drink. And you can buy these things off Amazon. They're not terribly expensive. The little filter set I've got is quite small, goes in a case about the size of a spectacle case, and it's capable of purifying up to 200 gallons of water on one filter, but with a hell of a lot of work. I know, I've tried it. But still, at least it means you have something to drink if you run out of bottled water. The next thing is drainage, and people don't really think about this. What? Well, as somebody once said in the comedy film, there are the input figures and there are the output figures. And you do need to be concerned about the output figures. Now, there is a man around here, I won't say any names, who recently has built himself a bunker. He has a water supply. He has canned food. No toilet. No way of processing solid or liquid waste. What exactly is he planning to do? Is he planning to poo in a corner and leave it to smell for a few months? Oh, I don't know, but I found that quite amusing when I found that out. So drainage is a problem, and then you have shutdown effects. Now, depends how long these systems are shut down. They're shut down for a few days, no real problems. If, on the other hand, they're shut down for a few months, then you start to have problems. And the sort of problems you start to have is in the water system, for example, the water will outgas. There is always a certain amount of gas present in water, and as through tiny leaks and so on and so forth, the water system depressurizes. You get a lot of air that comes out, and this air can block pipes. Not to mention the fact that the water that's already in the pipes might well be bacteriologically contaminated, because in general they rely on the water pressure, of which of course without pumping there is none, to keep the soil out of all the leaks. And there are a lot of leaks in mains water pipes, believe you me. Drainage is a more easy problem to understand. Basically, whatever's down there dries out and solidifies. And if you think the country can afford to dig up every single main drain, and yeah, doesn't bear think about really, does it? So everything's clogged up, including obviously your home sewer if you've still been using your loo when there's been no water. It's all clogged up. Who's going to clean it? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to replace the pipes if they need replacing, which they probably will do if they're solid? So shutdown effects, even after a few weeks shutdown, is going to be quite dramatic. So how to prepare? And the number one thing that you ought to think about doing is going and living in the country, not in a city, because cities are going to be rough, tough, violent places when people run out of food and water. And especially if someone knows you've got a store of food or water, they're going to be knocking on your door, I'm afraid. When you think about it, they've got family, they've got children, everyone's screaming at them, we're hungry, we're thirsty. You can't really blame them, but that's what's going to happen. In fact, if there was an economic collapse, a full economic collapse, the number of deaths worldwide would make World War II look like a kiddie's outing in the playground. We'd possibly be talking as high as 3 billion deaths, which is pretty near the 5 billion that the elites want. So, food and water, preferably move out of the town, have at least 2 weeks worth. I would personally recommend 4 weeks worth, because I very much doubt if the world economy falls over, it's going to take any less than about a month to sort things out to the point where things are working properly again. And then of course you've got the knock-on effects of the water system still not working properly, the drainage system possibly not working at all, and the food distribution network taking time to set up again. So that's UK collapse, and kind of leads me on to the housing bubble. Now, the question was the UK housing bubble, and I'm going to say there isn't one. Yeah, that's right, there isn't one. Why am I saying that? Well, there's still places in the UK where you can buy a house for £1,000. There's still places where you can buy a farm for 10,000. So there's no bubble in the UK. But what there is there's a localized series of 3 bubbles. There's one in London, which is the biggest one, obviously, one in Birmingham, and a smaller one in Manchester. And yeah, the bubbles, what can you say about it? Property, especially in London, has been boosted well above its actual real term value, in that people actually are finding that they're earning more from their property appreciation than they are from a really good job that pays them, say, 50 or 60,000 a year, and their property is appreciating at 100,000 a year. But I strongly suspect that when they come to try and get the money back, there might be a slight problemette there. Now, when the bubble bursts, it's likely to be a slow burst. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of this property has been bought by incoming foreign investment. And the latest one is the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, who are investing heavily in several cities around the world, including London and New York, and I also believe Hong Kong, as well as buying quite a lot of gold. Surprise, surprise. They've decided to get out of these risky financial investments for some peculiar reason. So it's going to be a slow burst. Now, don't get complacent about that, because obviously if the prices are rising, you will find it more difficult prices are falling, you will find it more difficult to sell, and you will find it more difficult to realize this extra equity that has mysteriously appeared in your house. Now, one thing that is predicted is that there's going to be a lot of property seizures from buy-to-let landlords. And the reason for that is that these people have taken out too much credit. In many cases, they're using not the rents from their property, or not just the rents from their property, but they're using a reliance on obtaining more credit to actually pay off the credit that they've already got. And should the money supply dry up, as it's almost bound to do, if people stop quantitative easing, which looks quite likely at the moment, then these people will be out on a limb, and we're talking massive, massive repossessions. So that could actually fuel the bubble collapse, because obviously if there's a lot of buy-to-let properties suddenly on the market at low prices, don't forget the banks tend to sell these things off for as little as possible in order that they can realize some money on it quickly, because they're not getting any money in from the mortgage or the loan or the restructured business investment proposition, as I've heard someone call such a thing. So yeah, so that is that. Well, I'm going to say my usual piece, but before I say that, I'm going to give you a look at the future. Now, I'm going to do another World War III update shortly, and I'm also going to do a piece which I've been asked for in the comments here, but it's too long, couldn't possibly cover it: immigration and the death of Western civilization is what I've been asked to comment on, and I'll do that in a video shortly. Anyhow, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share and subscribe, and thanks to all those who are listening live. Bye.